The old Mustang sat lifeless in the dusty corner of the garage, its once proud engine now just a silent memory of the past. Beside it stood Frank, a 62-year-old retired police officer, his hands trembling not from age, but from the weight of years of service and sacrifice. When Emily, a 25-year-old mechanic with fiery determination, stepped in to help him restore it, nobody believed she could. They laughed, whispered, and mocked her for wasting her time. But she saw more than rust and broken steel. She saw a man's dignity on the line. What neither of them knew was that just a month later, Frank would return, and what he carried with him would shock everyone. Frank Miller's mornings were quiet now. After 35 years serving as a police officer, the silence of retirement often felt heavier than the nights he once spent patrolling dark alleys. His home was small, tucked on the edge of a working-class neighborhood, where the sound of lawnmowers and barking dogs filled the air. The walls of his house carried framed photos of his younger days in uniform, alongside medals that gathered more dust than admiration. To most neighbors, he was just the quiet old man who lived alone. But behind his calm demeanor lay decades of scars, both visible and invisible. What kept him going was the old car under a tarp in his garage, a 1967 Mustang Fastback, deep green once, now dulled and chipped, a machine that had stood by him through much of his life. Frank had bought it right after graduating from the academy, back when the world seemed simpler, back when dreams outweighed burdens. Over the years, the Mustang became more than a car. It was his companion, his escape, his symbol of freedom. But time had been cruel. Its paint was faded, tires cracked, engine rusted, and now it was nothing more than a relic of his youth. Frank often stood there, staring at the car like an old friend he couldn't let go of. He wanted to bring it back to life, but his hands, once steady on the trigger and firm on the wheel, weren't as strong anymore. Tools slipped, bolts resisted. The Mustang, much like him, was fading. That's when Emily Walker entered his story. Emily was only 25, but she carried herself with a confidence most men twice her age lacked. With her auburn hair tied back in a messy ponytail, grease smudged across her cheek, and sharp hazel eyes, she looked like she belonged among wrenches and engines. She worked at a small independent garage across town, where most of the older mechanics doubted her abilities, mocking her as the girl who should have chosen a safer career. But Emily had grown up in a house where her father fixed everything with his bare hands, and she inherited not just his skills, but his stubborn pride. One afternoon, Frank found himself at that garage after the Mustang had refused to even cough to life. While the other mechanics shrugged, muttering it wasn't worth saving, Emily walked up to the old officer with a smile. "Mind if I take a look?" she asked, wiping her hands on her overalls. Frank studied her, skeptical. "This car's older than you, kid. Don't think it's gonna listen." But Emily wasn't the type to back down. She slid under the hood, her hands moving fast, eyes sharp. She spoke to Frank as if the Mustang was alive, as if she could feel its pain. And for the first time in a long while, Frank felt a spark of hope. In the days that followed, Emily began helping him at his own garage after hours. She didn't ask for money. Instead, she seemed drawn to the challenge, maybe even to the man himself, a veteran whose stories of duty, sacrifice, and regret fascinated her. Their bond grew stronger with every stubborn bolt loosened, every wire replaced, every night spent under flickering light bulbs, surrounded by the smell of oil and rust. Frank had never had children. Emily had never known her grandfather. Somehow, fate had stitched a strange family between them. Two souls from different generations, united by steel, grease, and the heartbeat of a machine waiting to be reborn. Still, what neither of them knew was that forces outside this quiet garage would soon test not just their patience, but their dignity. Because in this small town, not everyone wanted to see a young woman succeed, or an old man stand tall again. And the first storm was already on its way. It was a Saturday morning when Frank decided to roll the Mustang out of the garage for the first time in months. The car didn't run yet, but with Emily's help, it at least looked cleaner, less like a forgotten corpse and more like a project in progress. They pushed it into the driveway, sweat dripping, both smiling with pride. But pride doesn't last long in a world full of arrogant eyes. Across the street, Tyler Grant was watching. Tyler was 30, slick-haired, sharp-suited, and the son of the wealthiest car dealer in town. He wasn't just known for his money. He was known for rubbing it in the faces of those who had less. Tyler had just bought himself a brand new 2024 Shelby Mustang GT500, polished so clean you could see your reflection in it. He loved to rev the engine just to hear the roar echo through the neighborhood, and he loved even more to laugh at anyone who couldn't match his toys. When he saw Frank and Emily struggling with the old Mustang, Tyler walked over, sunglasses perched on his nose, a smirk carved deep into his face. "Well, well, well," he drawled. "What do we have here? A museum exhibit?" Frank kept his jaw tight. Emily wiped the sweat from her forehead, standing firm. "It's a '67 Fastback," Frank said quietly. "Classic American muscle." Tyler chuckled, circling the car like a predator sizing up prey. "Classic? More like scrap metal. My coffee machine has more horsepower than this rust bucket." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for the sting. "You know, Frank, retirement's supposed to be about resting, not embarrassing yourself with projects you'll never finish." Emily bristled. "This car has more history than that overpriced toy you drive around just to show off." Tyler turned to her, laughing loudly enough for neighbors to peek out from porches. "Oh, this is rich. A little girl mechanic defending Grandpa's retirement project? Don't tell me you actually think you can bring this thing back to life." The laughter carried, and a few of Tyler's friends, lounging by his driveway, joined in. Frank's chest tightened. He could feel every eye in the neighborhood on him, every whisper cutting deeper. He had faced criminals, gunfire, and chaos in his life. But humiliation like this, in front of his own home, was something else entirely. Emily's fists clenched, but Frank put a hand on her shoulder. His pride told him to fight back, but his wisdom told him this wasn't the moment. Still, Tyler wasn't finished. "Tell you what," Tyler said, tapping the hood of Frank's car like it was trash. "If you can get this antique running in the next month, I'll admit I was wrong. But when you fail, and you will, you'll both prove what everyone already knows. Some people just don't belong in this world anymore." He strutted back toward his shining GT500, his laughter echoing, his friends clapping him on the back like he'd just won a championship. The roar of his engine thundered as he sped off, leaving dust in his wake. Emily's eyes burned with anger. "We're not letting him get away with that, Frank." Frank looked at the old Mustang, then at her. His hands trembled, not from age this time, but from rage barely contained. "He wants to see what we're made of?" Frank muttered, his voice low, steady. "Then he's going to." But deep inside, he knew Tyler wasn't just mocking a car, he was mocking their worth, their dignity. And that made the challenge far more dangerous. The countdown to humiliation, or redemption, had begun. The Mustang looked beautiful from the outside, at least compared to where it had been weeks before. The cleaned-up chrome, polished fenders, and new tires made it appear like a project coming alive. But beneath the hood, where the real battle was waiting, things were far from promising. Frank and Emily stood side by side, staring into the engine bay. The V8 sat there like a corpse, parts missing, hoses cracked, wires frayed. Years of neglect had left behind rust that ate at bolts like disease, and every attempt to turn the key brought only silence. Emily chewed her lip, studying it carefully. "We're not just dealing with an engine rebuild. This thing's heart is gone. We might need to replace almost everything." Frank's shoulders sagged. He had dreamed of hearing that growl again, the same sound that had carried him down open highways in his youth. But now the Mustang looked more like a nightmare than a dream. Word of Tyler's challenge spread fast around town. At the diner where Frank used to grab breakfast, whispers followed him. "That old cop's lost it. There's no way they'll get that heap running." Even at the parts store, the clerk raised an eyebrow when Emily walked in with her list. "Who's working on this thing?" the man asked, smirking. "I am," Emily replied firmly. That earned her a chuckle. "Good luck. You'll need a miracle." But Emily wasn't built to quit. and Frank wasn't about to let his dignity be buried under Tyler's arrogance. They began working day and night. Emily crawled under the car, her clothes soaked in grease, while Frank, despite his aching back and stiff hands, passed her tools and steadied the jack. Yet each discovery brought new despair. The carburetor was corroded beyond repair. The pistons were worn. Even the transmission showed signs of giving out. What should have been a restoration project looked like a complete resurrection, and with only a month on the clock. One evening, as they sat in the garage surrounded by dismantled parts, Emily wiped sweat from her forehead. "Frank, we're running out of time. Even if we order replacements, they might not come fast enough." Frank stared at the piles of broken pieces scattered across the floor. His mind raced back to his years on the force, the countless times people told him something was impossible. He had always found a way then. Could he find a way now? "We'll make it work," he said finally, his voice steady. "I don't care if I have to beg, borrow, or improvise. Tyler's not going to win." But just as determination began to build, Tyler reappeared, this time at the garage itself. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding his mocking eyes. "Thought I'd come by and see the miracle in progress," he said. His gaze swept over the dismantled engine, the greasy floor, the exhausted faces of Frank and Emily. He let out a long, slow laugh. "Oh man, this is even worse than I thought. You two don't stand a chance." Emily shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "You'll see." Tyler smirked, pulling out his phone. "Don't worry. I'm documenting this for when you fail. People should remember the look on your faces." With that, he snapped a photo and left, the sound of his laughter trailing down the street. Frank tightened his grip on the wrench in his hand until his knuckles turned white. Emily placed a hand on his arm. "Let him laugh," she said softly. "The louder they laugh, the harder we're going to hit back when this car roars again." But deep down, even Emily knew this was no ordinary restoration. This was a fight against time, against doubt, against humiliation itself. And with every passing day, the impossible challenge grew heavier. The question wasn't just if they could fix the car. The question was whether they could endure the storm of failure waiting to swallow them whole. 2 weeks into the challenge, the garage no longer smelled of hope. It smelled of burnt oil, frustration, and failure. The dismantled engine parts that once promised resurrection now looked like tombstones of effort wasted. Frank and Emily had worked day and night, but each attempt to bring the Mustang to life ended in silence. On a gray Saturday morning, Frank decided it was time for the first real test. The engine was reassembled, patched with second-hand parts and whatever they could afford. Emily turned the key, her hands trembling. The Mustang coughed, sputtered, and died. She tried again. Nothing. Just the hollow click of failure. The silence was deafening. Frank closed his eyes, every muscle in his body tight. He had faced men with weapons, stared down fear in the line of duty, but nothing compared to the sting of defeat before his own reflection. That afternoon, Tyler returned. Not alone this time. He brought half the neighborhood, including some of Frank's old colleagues who now shook their heads in pity. Tyler's Shelby gleamed in the sunlight, a cruel contrast to Frank's lifeless Mustang. "Well?" Tyler asked, spreading his arms. "Let's see this beast roar." Emily shot Frank a desperate glance. Frank's heart pounded. This was the moment. He stepped inside the car, turned the key, and prayed. The engine wheezed, coughed, and then silence. A long, hopeless silence. The crowd erupted in laughter. Tyler doubled over, clapping his hands like he had just witnessed the funniest show of his life. "I knew it. I told you all. Scrap metal. Look at him. The great Frank Miller, a decorated cop, brought down by a pile of rust." The words pierced deeper than any bullet ever had. Frank stepped out of the car, his shoulders hunched, his head heavy with shame. Emily tried to speak up, but Tyler cut her off. "And you," he sneered at her. "Miss, I can fix anything. Maybe you should stick to changing tires, sweetheart. Engines are for real mechanics." The crowd roared with cruel laughter. Some shook their heads, others whispered, but no one defended them. Frank's face burned. His hands shook, not with anger this time, but with humiliation. He had dragged Emily into this, and now both of them were standing in the middle of the street like fools. Emily's eyes shone with fury, but her voice cracked as she whispered, "Don't listen to them, Frank." But Frank couldn't lift his head. For the first time since his retirement, he felt truly broken. Not because of Tyler's arrogance, but because deep inside, he feared Tyler was right. Maybe he didn't belong in this world anymore. Maybe his time had passed. The Mustang sat there in silence, like a coffin holding the last pieces of Frank's pride. Tyler revved his Shelby, the thunder of modern horsepower drowning out every thought. "Face it, old man," he shouted over the roar. "Your time is done. You're just another relic, like that car." The crowd cheered as Tyler sped off, leaving behind a trail of dust and humiliation that clung to Frank like chains. That night, Frank sat alone in the garage long after Emily left. His hands rested on the hood of the car, trembling. For the first time, he considered giving up. He thought of covering the Mustang with its tarp again, sealing away not just the car, but his last connection to purpose. But then, something stirred deep inside, a whisper from the past, a memory of the young officer who once refused to quit, no matter the odds. Frank's head rose slowly. His eyes burned not with shame, but with determination beginning to kindle again. He wasn't done. Not yet. The humiliation had cut him to pieces. But sometimes, rock bottom is the only place a man can find the strength to rise. The garage was silent the next morning, but not with defeat. It was the silence of focus. Frank sat at his workbench, staring at the Mustang's worn-out carburetor. His pride still ached from Tyler's laughter, but shame had turned into fuel. He wasn't ready to cover the car with a tarp and quit. Not after everything he'd survived in life. When Emily arrived, she expected to find him broken. Instead, she found him with sleeves rolled up, sweat already glistening on his forehead. "You came back," she said softly. Frank didn't look up. "I don't quit, Emily. Not now. Not ever." She smiled faintly. That was the Frank she admired. The fighter who never surrendered. And together they dove back into the work. The process was brutal. Bolts snapped, grease burned their hands, and hours turned into nights. They didn't have the money for new parts, so they scavenged. Emily visited junkyards, searching for pieces that could be repurposed. Frank tore apart old radios, fans, anything that might give them a wire or bolt they could reuse. It wasn't restoration, it was survival. One evening, Frank's hand slipped, and a wrench smashed his knuckles. Blood ran down his fingers, but he gritted his teeth. "I've been through worse," he muttered. Emily rushed to bandage him, but he waved her off. "You're gonna tear yourself apart," she said. "Then I'll tear apart with this car," Frank replied. His voice wasn't angry, it was resolute. Every day was a war. The heat of the summer sun turned the garage into an oven. Sweat dripped into their eyes, tools slipped from exhausted hands, but neither of them stopped. At night, Frank would sit on an old stool, staring at the Mustang, whispering like it was a comrade from his past. "You're not dead yet, old friend. Not until I say so." Emily, too, found herself growing. The humiliation Tyler had spat at her stung deeply, but it only hardened her will. She refused to be the girl who couldn't handle engines. She studied manuals late into the night, scribbling notes, sketching diagrams. Her hands became blistered, her hair streaked with oil, but her spirit was iron. Together, they found rhythm. Frank's years of discipline blended with Emily's fire and innovation. Where one faltered, the other lifted. Where tools failed, their creativity replaced them. Slowly, the pieces began to fit. Slowly, the Mustang started to resemble more than a pile of parts. Still, the deadline loomed like a storm cloud. Tyler's mocking words echoed in their heads, and whispers from neighbors grew crueler. Some even passed by the garage just to smirk. "You two still chasing the impossible?" one man asked. Emily fired back without hesitation. "You'll see. Just wait." But inside, doubt gnawed at both of them. The Mustang had yet to show even the faintest spark of life. And the closer the day of reckoning came, the heavier the weight grew. One night, as they closed the garage, Emily leaned against the hood, exhausted. "Frank, what if we can't do it?" Frank stared at her, his tired eyes burning with quiet fire. "Then at least we go down swinging. Better to fall fighting than to let them bury us alive." The Mustang stood between them like a monument of struggle, battered, wounded, but not yet defeated. And deep within its steel heart, waiting in silence, was the promise of a roar that could silence every laugh. The night before Tyler's deadline, the garage was a battlefield. Tools scattered across the floor. Empty coffee cups lined the bench. Sweat clung to Frank and Emily like armor worn thin. They had given everything: blood, sleepless nights, scraped knuckles, and yet the Mustang still hadn't spoken. Emily sat on the concrete floor, her back against the wall, wiping grease from her cheek. "We've tried everything," she whispered, her voice cracking. "New plugs, rebuilt carburetor, rewired half the system. It should have worked." Frank stood over the car, his eyes hollow, but burning. He didn't answer at first. His hands rested on the hood, trembling, not from age this time, but from the unbearable weight of failure threatening to crush him. Then he took a deep breath. His voice was low, steady, almost like he was talking to an old friend. "I chased criminals down dark alleys when I was younger. I stood toe-to-toe with men who wanted me dead. I didn't back down then, and I'm not backing down now." Emily's eyes lifted to him. "We're missing something," Frank muttered. "Something simple, something we've overlooked." And then it hit him. A memory, decades old, flashed in his mind. A night in the late 70s when the Mustang had stalled on a highway patrol. Back then, it had been the ignition coil, a tiny, almost invisible part that, if overlooked, could silence even the strongest engine. Frank's eyes widened. He rushed to the bench, rummaging through a box of forgotten spares. His fingers closed around a dusty, neglected ignition coil. Emily jumped to her feet. "Are you serious? That thing looks ancient." "It's all we've got," Frank said. Together, they installed it, hands shaking, hearts pounding. Emily climbed into the driver's seat, turning the key one more time. The silence hung thick, like the world itself was holding its breath. And then, rumble. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared. A deep, throaty growl filled the garage, echoing against the walls like thunder. The Mustang was alive. Frank staggered back, his eyes wide, his lips trembling. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Emily slammed her fist against the steering wheel, laughing through tears. "It's alive! Frank, it's alive!" Frank's hands went to his face, tears cutting through grease and dirt. He let out a laugh that cracked under the weight of emotion. "You did it," he whispered. Then louder, "We did it!" The Mustang's roar filled the neighborhood, drawing curious eyes to the garage. This wasn't the sound of a car. It was the sound of defiance, of dignity reborn, of two souls refusing to bow. Emily stepped out of the car, her eyes shining. "What do you think Tyler's gonna say when he hears this?" Frank looked at her, his jaw set, his eyes blazing with pride. "He's not going to say anything. He's going to hear the truth in this engine and choke on it." The Mustang purred beside them, alive, powerful, a beast reborn from rust and ridicule. And for the first time in weeks, Frank stood tall, not as a broken man, not as a relic, but as a fighter ready for redemption. The war wasn't over. Tomorrow, Tyler would be waiting. Tomorrow, the whole town would watch. But tonight, the Mustang sang, and its song was victory. Sunday afternoon, the town gathered at the edge of the square. Tyler had made sure of it. He wanted an audience for Frank's final humiliation. His Shelby GT 500 gleamed under the sun, polished until it looked like liquid silver. He leaned against it with sunglasses on, a smug grin plastered across his face. His friends surrounded him, laughing, phones ready to capture the failure. Frank pulled up a few minutes later. But this time he wasn't pushing the Mustang. He was driving it. The '67 Fastback rumbled down Main Street like a lion awakening after decades of slumber. Its deep, thunderous growl turned heads instantly. The crowd fell silent. Eyes widened. Phones dropped. Children covered their ears from the raw, powerful sound of a true muscle car brought back to life. Frank sat tall behind the wheel, his weathered hands gripping it firmly. Beside him, Emily leaned out the window, her auburn hair whipping in the wind, pride shining in her hazel eyes. Tyler's smirk faltered for the first time. The Mustang came to a stop right across from Tyler's Shelby. Frank revved the engine once, and the sound rolled through the square like a declaration of war. "This," Frank said as he stepped out, his voice carrying over the crowd, "is what you call American muscle. Not plastic, not arrogance. History." The crowd erupted in cheers. Some clapped, some whistled, and some shouted Frank's name. Tyler tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "So you got it running. Big deal. That doesn't mean it can—" But before he could finish, Frank climbed back in and pressed the pedal. The Mustang roared, the rear tires screeching against the pavement. The smell of burning rubber filled the air as the car shot forward a few feet, controlled and powerful, before coming to a perfect stop. The crowd went wild. Emily leaned out again, her voice sharp as steel. "Looks like this old relic has more life than you ever will, Tyler." The insult hit like a hammer. The crowd howled with laughter, this time at him. Tyler's face flushed red, his jaw tight. He tried to fire up his Shelby in response, revving it loud. But no matter how he pushed it, the sound of his machine was hollow compared to the raw soul of the resurrected 67. Frank stepped out once more, his head held high. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a retired cop. He was a man respected, admired, cheered. Emily stood by his side, grease-stained and proud, the partner who had made it all possible. The humiliation had been reversed. Tyler, who once laughed the loudest, now stood with his pride in ashes. Frank raised a hand, silencing the cheers just enough to speak. His voice was steady, warm, but sharp. "You can buy horsepower, Tyler, but you can't buy heart. And that's something you'll never understand." The crowd roared again, chanting Frank's name, some even chanting Emily's. For once, they weren't just mechanics in a garage. They were champions in the eyes of the town. Tyler climbed into his Shelby and sped off, his tires screeching, not in triumph, but in shame. Frank and Emily exchanged a look. No words were needed. The Mustang stood between them, alive, proud, victorious. And for both of them, this wasn't just about an engine. It was about proving that dignity, respect, and resilience could never be silenced. But as the cheers carried on into the evening, Frank knew there was still one thing left to say, one truth to leave behind. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the Mustang idled in the square, its low growl echoing like a heartbeat. Frank rested his hand on the hood, his tired eyes reflecting the pride of a man who had clawed his dignity back from the dirt. Emily stood beside him, arms crossed, a grin she couldn't hide. For a long moment, Frank just breathed it in, the cheers still ringing in his ears, the sight of Tyler vanishing in shame, the feel of victory in his bones. But more than that, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He turned to Emily, his voice softer now. "You know, this car carried me through some of the darkest years of my life. Back then, it was just me and the Mustang against the world. But this time, I couldn't have done it alone." Emily's eyes softened. "You didn't need to. You've carried enough weight in your life, Frank. This one, we carried together." Frank smiled, the wrinkles on his face deepening. He looked at the Mustang, then back at her. "Funny thing is, people think this was about the car. It wasn't. It was about proving that no matter how much the world changes, no matter how loud the arrogant voices get, experience, grit, and heart will always win." He paused, his eyes glistening as he looked out at the few townsfolk still lingering, whispering about what they'd witnessed. "That's the thing about respect. You don't demand it. You earn it. And once you've earned it, nobody can take it away." Emily reached for the keys, dangling them playfully. "So, you ready to let her stretch her legs?" Frank chuckled, sliding into the driver's seat. Emily climbed in beside him. With one more thunderous roar, the Mustang rolled out of the square, leaving behind the dust of humiliation and carrying with it the roar of redemption. As they cruised down the highway, wind rushing in, Emily leaned her head back and smiled. "Feels like freedom, doesn't it?" Frank nodded slowly. "No, feels like life again." The Mustang's headlights cut through the dusk, a symbol not just of victory, but of survival. The world may laugh, the world may doubt, but dignity, once restored, shines brighter than any polished machine money can buy. If you've ever been written off, laughed at, or told your time was done, remember Frank's Mustang, remember Emily's fire, and remember this: it's never too late to rise, to fight, to prove them all wrong. Stories like this deserve to be shared. Subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join me for the next one, because the fight for dignity never ends.